And at the very outset, I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Ayurveda Conversations Tadvidya Sambhasha. And on day 3, the session 2 has been dedicated to evidence-based research in Ayurveda. So the main points to be discussed in this session are perspective on evidence in Western medicine versus Ayurvedic Pramana. What's evidence-based Ayurveda? What is Ayurveda research and its scope? What aspect of RCT as a research methodology works with Ayurveda? And such other questions are actually planned to be addressed during this session. And I would like to share my views on these topics. Now the question, evidence-based research. Actually research is what creates evidence. So it is research for creating an evidence base. And once the evidence is created, then you inform the practitioners to apply this evidence in their clinical practice. So what we have is evidence-based medicine, or we can say evidence-based practice, and research is what creates this evidence base. So now this concept is actually a very new concept in Western medicine. Just some decades ago, there is this sudden boom in the idea of evidence-based medicine, and it has become a buzzword now. So it would be preposterous to claim that such an approach already existed in Ayurveda many thousands of years ago. We need to look at Ayurveda and modern medicine from its own developmental perspective. And I would like to clearly say that we don't have in Ayurveda exactly the kind of procedures and processes that is today identified with what is called as evidence-based medicine. Because evidence-based medicine itself emerged after the development of a lot of research methodologies and experimental methods, like the randomized control trials, the statistics. These things don't exist in this way in the Ayurvedic tradition. So the question about whether Ayurveda was already evidence-based, I think we have to be very clear. It was not evidence-based in the sense that it is understood today. That I would like to underline those sentences. Ayurveda is not evidence-based in the way modern medicine demands it to be, right? Publication of clinical trials, conducting all kinds of the modern studies, applying statistics, then coming to conclusions. The whole hierarchy of evidence that we know today. In that sense, we don't find any body of literature to support Ayurveda. So today, this is a new initiative. Because modern medicine has become the dominant healthcare system, and regulatory authorities as well as the scientific community require this so-called body of evidence to regulate and to monitor the quality of the practice of various medical systems, this demand for evidence has emerged. So rather than inquiring about how Ayurveda was evidence-based in the past, the whole question is how Ayurveda is being made evidence-based today. And this is also a big problem because modern medicine is based on a different epistemological foundation. In modern medicine, we try to break the individual into parts and then understand how the whole functions. Yeah, so the problem is today that Ayurveda is being asked to reconstruct itself as an evidence-based medicine, imitating what is happening in the field of modern medicine. And this is where I think there are problems, because Modern medicine and Ayurveda are based on two different premises. I'm not going into a long discourse on what these differences are, but just to highlight a few important points. Modern medicine is based on the concept of breaking down the human being into the parts, and by understanding the parts, try to get an insight into how the whole functions. So you take the human body, we break it down into its constituent parts. We start from atoms, then molecules, then cells, then tissues, organs, organ systems, and then these networks. So breaking the body to its building blocks and then understanding. And second principle is the principle of generalization. All human beings are made of the same constituents. So what works on one individual will work across the population. In fact, this is the philosophy behind the randomized controlled trial, where you sample a population and you give one medicine to a small group that is supposed to represent the population. And the premise is that if it works on this small sample, then it will work on the whole population. That is the whole concept in modern medicine. Whereas in Ayurveda, we believe in the concept that nahi jnanavayavena kritsne jnane jnanam utpaddi. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. So Ayurveda is not breaking down the individual into different constituents and studying them as if it's the same thing in all human beings. On the other hand, we say that although we are all made of the same ingredients, the way we are configured is different. So each individual is unique and different. So what works on one individual may not work on all the individuals. And this is why an RCT may not be the ideal way to, generate evidence in the field of Ayurveda. So if I give a medicine to one person, an Ayurvedic medicine, our premise is that same medicine may not work on another individual, even though he may have the same disease, because the stages of disease, this Ayurveda is there more specific and individualized. So in this way, there are so many differences. I'm not going into all the details for being more brief and to the point. So the question here at first is not at all whether evidence-based medicine is required or not. That is something I will come to a little later. But here the primary question is that the current model of evidence-based medicine is not suitable for Ayurveda. So 2 points I have made so far. One is that evidence-based medicine, in the way it is defined in the modern medical context, did not exist in the old tradition. It was not there even in modern medicine. Because these new methodologies, research methodologies like RCTs, observational studies, the preclinical studies, animal experiments, all these are very new. And after they emerged and the branch of statistics emerged, then only this new concept of evidence has come up. So that's the first point, that such a kind of evidence-based medicine did not exist in the tradition of Ayurveda. The second point is that trying to reconstruct Ayurveda in this model of evidence-based medicine has its limitations, because the current methodologies are suited to the philosophy of Western of modern medicine. Yeah. Sorry. Now comes the question of whether medicine should be evidence-based at all. Can we, just do... So before evidence-based medicine emerged, the contrasting approach was called as expert-based medicine. Everything was led by a few experts. They would do all the experiments in their practice itself, and based on their skills, they will, become good clinicians. So this shift has actually happened from expert-based medicine to evidence-based medicine. In Ayurveda also, we give a lot of emphasis to the expert. That is why in the Chaturshpada, the physician is considered to be the most important because of his expertise. It's not evidence that is given most importance. It's a physician. So the physician's expertise is given a lot of value. So does this mean that Ayurveda was also expert-based medicine, just like modern medicine was before the emergence of, the so-called evidence-based movement? This is a question that I would like to address. And in my opinion, it is not true. Ayurveda represents a synthesis of human expertise. It represents its integration with whatever evidence or rationale is available. Evidence was not available in the way we are generating it today, but that concept was there. And I would like to say that if modern medicine is evidence based, Ayurveda is actually yukti based. So in Ayurveda, because this is very important to bring in standards, quality, and even regulations. A physician had to make sure that his treatment was based on yukti. If it was not based on yukti, then his treatment success, even his success, is not considered acceptable. So Charaka makes this very blatant statement: Vina tarkena ya siddhi yadricha siddhirevasa. If I am, for example, a clinician and I am doing my practice, I have given a medicine for a patient gets better. Chakrapani is very explicit here. He says that if you do not have a proper tarka to substantiate that it was really your treatment that was the reason for the patient getting better, if you cannot substantiate it, then this is nothing but chance effect. Yadricha siddhirevasa. Vina tarkena ya siddhi yadricha siddhirevasa. Samyak prayogam sarvesham siddhirakhyadi karmanam. In that context, this is from Charaka Sutra. Chakrapani is saying that the siddhi or efficacy, this is the Ayurvedic term for efficacy. Today we have two terminologies, safety and efficacy. Ayurveda also considered itself to be a safe and efficacious system. And the term for efficacy is siddhi. Siddhir yuktau pratishtida. Efficacy is based on yukti or rationale. When you give the treatment according to a rationale, then that treatment will have success or siddhi. And the most efficacious treatment should be used. Tesham siddhataman yogan shrunun madhavinashanan. So Charaka says, amongst all the formulations that I am discussing, I have picked up the most efficacious, siddhataman. So you can see that the idea of efficacy, and there is also the idea of safety. Prayoga shamayad vyadhim yonyam anyamudirayed nasav vishuddha. Shuddhastu shamayed yanna kopayed. So Shuddha Chikitsa, Ayurveda is a Siddha and Shuddha Chikitsa. Interestingly, I think the Siddha system of medicine itself is called as Siddha because efficacious, proven to be efficacious. So the most efficacious, having picked up the most efficacious remedies and systems, that word Siddhatvam is there in Ayurveda also. Siddhi is, we have even a sthana called Siddhi Sthana, which is focused on efficacy and measurable and repeatable outcomes. So it would be wrong to say that Ayurveda left everything to the physician's expertise and said that you can do whatever you want and whatever you do is the right thing. So this kind of the expertise has been given importance, but it is not the ultimate. This is the reason why in Ayurveda we also have a division of treatment called Yukti Vyapashraya Chikitsa. That there is a limit to this rationale also. Today also modern doctors would agree when there is a limit to the rationale, when there is a limit to Yukti, then you have to go beyond Yukti and do whatever is good for your patient. That is where the expertise comes in. The physician as an expert has to decide what is the evidence available, what is the evidence not available, and what is the best thing that can be given to the patient in a given context. And I will come to this concept of evidence-based medicine also today a little later. So it is very clear that although evidence did not exist in the way we are seeing it today, Ayurveda was supposed to be based on rationale. Every clinician had to do the tarka and tell this patient got better due to my intervention, not by chance. And Chakrapani is clearly coining a new term. So Charaka has used the word Yadrichha Siddhi, which is chance effect. And interestingly, today, why are we doing statistics? Statistics is done to compute the data and arrive at a conclusion that this effect is not by chance, but really it's a real effect. So the purpose of statistics is to distinguish between real effect and chance effect. And Charaka is telling that if you don't have a rationale, then it is a chance effect, Yadrichha Siddhi. Otherwise, what is the term for real effect? Pratiniyamiki Siddhi. This is an amazing, contribution by Chakrapani. By coining a term called Pratiniyamiki Siddhi, he distinguishes between real effect and chance effect. So a clinician may treat and cure a lot of patients, but he may not have anything to do with the cure. In Chakrapani's words, Natra Vaidyaha Roga Pramokshe Karanam. And what is the outcome? Daiva Vashad, Gunakshara Nyayena. The patient got better because of Daiva, because of his faith. He was lucky to get cured. The doctor had nothing to do with it, because the doctor is not knowing what has happened. He's not able to explain how and why the treatment worked. So this Chakrapani compares to Gunakshara Nyaya. Gunakshara means a worm forming the shape of an alphabet. The worm is not at all aware that it has created the shape of an alphabet. But people who see it may mistake that the worm is literate and it is creating the shapes of different alphabets. So Natra Vaidyaha Roga Pramokshe Karana. So it's a very bold statements. So we can say that Ayurveda also believed in rationality. Ayurveda believed that, but most of the time the difference in Ayurveda is that we are not able to have the evidence always before the treatment is initiated. Why? Because RCTs are generalized. You can start this distinction between Pratiniyamiki Siddhi and Yadrichha Siddhi, I think, is a very, very significant idea. This has not been discussed so much. And these portions of the classical texts need to be re-looked into to define how Ayurveda should be. So when it is Yukti, now this is the difference. What Ayurvedic text says that whenever you treat a patient, you must justify it by giving the rationale. So the evidence always does not come before you are practicing, but it is after the practice. So in Ayurveda, I think the focus should be more on practice-based evidence. Every clinician should be asked actually to justify and give the rationale for all the treatments they are doing and whatever outcomes they are obtaining. So this brings up to this new concept of practice-based evidence as opposed to evidence-based practice. So certain principles, all those are well established. That is the evidence already available. Based on those principles, we have to make new applications, and innovation is always necessary. Whenever a new patient comes, we may have to develop some new approach because the formulation has to be modified, the treatment protocol has to be customized. There's no way we can always do prior research and then only apply on the patient. So in Ayurveda, we have a combination of evidence which is already available, the Yukti from the Shastras, and then the Shastra as such. The Shastra as such, and then the Yukti. So there is a threefold framework called Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava. So Shruti is the evidence available. The Shastra is the evidence. Yukti is the rationale of the physician. And verification by experience is Anubhava. Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava. So this is the framework of what we could call as how evidence-based practice was there in ancient times. And they never did experiments in the way we did today. It was all based on observation. And we must also consider the fact that Ayurveda was developed at a stage when the population was also very less, not like we have today. And there was not so much of global communication. Global communication was there, but not in the scale we are witnessing today. So all these were case studies and observational, initiatives which gradually and over centuries built up the evidence. So there is a difference in the way Ayurveda developed its yukti and rationale and justification of how and why treatments work. That need to be considered if we want to make Ayurveda also a rational system of healing. We definitely need to show an alternative model of how evidence can be generated, and that has to be in tune with the whole tradition of Ayurveda itself. So this is the third point that I'm making, is that Ayurveda had its own definition of rationality. Now, Charaka Samhita, there is a very interesting verse which says, Tasmadna bhishaja yuktam yukti bahyena bheshajam dhimata kinchidadheyam jivita arogya kankshina. Now, the textbook is giving a public warning. The textbook is telling very clearly that Tasmad na bhishaja yuktam yukti bahyena bheshajam bhishaja yuktam na adeyam. If the physician has given you a treatment which is not based on yukti, then you reject it. Jivita arogya kankshina. If you have a desire for your life, if you have a desire for your health, then don't accept treatment from any clinician which is not based on yukti. So with this verse, I want to give the evidence that Ayurveda had this kind of a yukti-based approach. Yukti was very, very essential. When two clinicians are discussing, everybody has to speak on the basis of yukti. Otherwise, it was not accepted. And yukti exactly is not evidence in the way, it is defined in modern times. So what I would like to say is that we need to present Ayurveda as a rational, systematic system of medicine. If anybody and everybody can do whatever they want and there is no system of auditing, then this system, Ayurveda, cannot get accepted as a rational approach to healing. So definitely we need that. But I think the whole difference is going to be on how we differentiate between what is called as evidence-based medicine today and what we would characterize Ayurveda as yukti-based medicine. If we can clearly define and understand the differences between these two approaches, we can make Ayurveda more organized, and we can do the kind of so-called research that is necessary to strengthen the yukti of Ayurvedic physicians so that their practice becomes more predictable and will generate the kind of evidence that will support Ayurveda as a valid system of healing. If you look at the new concept of evidence-based medicine or practice, it's considered now to be a three-legged stool. There are three things: the published evidence, clinical expertise, and the patient perspective. All the three things need to be brought together to make it really evidence-based practice. And here I think the Ayurvedic approach was more holistic. We had Shastra, we had the Mati. So Shastram Jyoti Pragashartham Darshanam Vipula Mati Tabhyam Bhishaksuyuktabhyam Chikitsan Naparathiri Yoga Masam tu Yo Vidya Deshakalopapadidam Purusham Vichya Satnyeyo Pishaguttama. So we have Shastra on the one hand, we have the Mati of the physician on the other hand, and thirdly we have the patient. Purusham Vichya. When you are applying the knowledge of Shastra, which is processed through your Mati, you must also look at the Purusha or the individual whom you are addressing and synthesize these three sources to make it, a rational system of healing. I think here Ayurveda is more in tune with the modern approach where evidence, so-called research-based evidence, is only one pillar of the actual practice of evidence-based medicine. Clinical expertise is also given importance, and the patient's preferences and perspective also given importance. So now to just sum up the key points that I was trying to communicate so far. In Western medicine, there has been this movement from expert-based medicine to evidence-based medicine, which has happened over the last century very slowly, and especially has come into dominance in the late 90s. So it is a very new phenomenon. And this has gone hand in hand with the development of new research methodologies, statistics, and all these new approaches to build evidence. And such an approach is definitely not there in the Ayurvedic tradition. And the mistake that we are making is that in order to make Ayurveda acceptable and to meet the demand of what is happening in modern medicine, we are also trying to generate the same kind of evidence for Ayurveda. Because of epistemological differences, non-suitability of the research methods that we are using, such an approach is not suitable for Ayurveda. I explained about one key thing. Modern medicine is break down into parts, you understand the whole. Ayurveda is you cannot break things to its parts, you must understand the whole as it is. And when you do that in modern medicine, if you study one individual, you have studied the whole population. I mean, generally that is the idea of generalizability. Whereas in Ayurveda, we say even though we are made of same ingredients, we are configured differently. So the same thing will not work on everyone. So these differences make it very challenging to apply modern research designs to generate evidence in Ayurveda. But if you look at the tradition, the Ayurveda has defined its own standards and methods for validating knowledge. Definitely, Ayurveda did not or gave importance to the individual physician or expert. In Chatushpada, the clinician is the most important. But when it comes to treatment, Yukti has been given importance. Yukti is the rationale. And it's very interesting that Ayurveda says that there is a limit to such evidence or rationale also. Ultimately, wherever evidence or Yukti is available, you must use that. But if it is not available, you have the freedom to go to Daiva Vipasaraya, Sattva Vajaya methods of treatment, which are also go beyond the scope of Yukti. So what you can see is Ayurveda is much more comprehensive in its outlook. And it has tried to synthesize the so-called evidence-based approach with the expert-based approach and fine-tune it to meet patient expectations. So these are some of the thoughts that come to my mind, and I would also like to share how I was very much influenced by my mentor Krishna Kumarji, who was the MD of Ayurveda Pharmacy, and also by his visionary outlook, he set up a Gurukula system for teaching Ayurveda, and I was lucky to be one of the beneficiaries of this initiative. And right from the beginning, from my younger age, I had very much interest in science. And so I had found it very difficult to accept Ayurveda with all its religious, appendages and also a faith-based approach. Generally, the Ayurvedic community, especially the Orthodox community has great faith. And that was the time when there was a big debate going on whether Ayurveda should be researched or not. And here I would like to say very frankly, there are so many things, that one can remember fondly about Krishna Kumarji. But certain things that have really profoundly touched me and influenced me was the stance that Krishna Kumarji took when it comes to faith and skepticism. When we were students of Ayurveda, one of the most pioneering research works was happening at AVP. Krishna Kumarji knocked on the doors of the WHO and demanded that Ayurveda be evaluated scientifically. And the first ever WHO sponsored scientific study to assess the efficacy of Ayurveda and rheumatoid arthritis happened at the AVP campus. And that was a very risky thing to do because the methodologies, the cooperation between allopathic doctors, Ayurveda, these are all very challenging. And if something went wrong, Ayurveda would have been, given a black mark. So I was very much intrigued by how Krishna Kumarji, who was having so much faith and belief in the spiritual background of Ayurveda and Ayurveda itself ventured to do such an adventure. So I had once asked him, Krishna Kumarji, how can you really test Ayurveda? Is it not risky? And then he replied that, I have no doubt that Ayurveda works. So what is the problem in testing it? So this is where I realized that absolute faith and skepticism, have no conflict. The problem with us is we do not have absolute faith. And so we are afraid of being questioned, of being tested. Later, under his guidance, I was also able to involve in another major study. So one was WHO, which when we were students, we witnessed it. The second study was funded by the National Institutes of Health, the USA. And again, that was his initiative. He went for some of his own treatments. When he had been in the US, he interacted with a lot of doctors there and got them interested and convinced. And we did a very rigorous testing of Ayurvedic medicines, and the result was favorable for Ayurveda. And then, with an all-knowing smile, he said, I knew that Ayurveda would come out successful. So I'm reminded of, the Ramayana, where Lord Rama is subjecting Sita to Agni Pariksha. I've always found this a bit disturbing, this account in the Ramayana. Why did Rama do that? Did he not have faith in Sita? And then I realized this is Rama's dukkha, or Rama's sorrow, which is the way people like Krishna Kumarji were looking at research. For the sake of the world, because the society was having a doubt and Rama was a king, he had a responsibility to prove the chastity of Sita. Similarly, we are in a situation today to prove the chastity of Ayurveda, and people who really believe in it and people who really have the experience of Ayurveda, working, they will not have any problem or conflict in Ayurveda being tested or, subjected to investigations. So this is a very big lesson that I learned from Krishna Kumarji, that in the ultimate analysis, if your faith is strong enough, then you can face any kind of skepticism. You can courageously meet the acid test, the final test of what is truth and untruth. And I remain ever indebted for his mentoring influence in my life and career. Namaste.